Dust swirled through the shattered window as the crosshairs settled on the target. Down in the kill zone, the man who had openly mocked her just hours ago was bleeding out, surrounded by a dozen heavily armed insurgents. He needed a miracle. What he got was a female SEAL with a .338 Lapua. Forward operating base. Cerberus sat like a festering wound in the heart of the Syrian desert. The air inside the Tactical Operations Center was thick with the smell of stale coffee ozone from the humming server racks and the nervous sweat of a dozen intelligence analysts. On the main screens, thermal imaging from an MQ-9 Reaper drone painted a bleak, monochromatic picture of an abandoned oil refinery 20 miles outside of Al-Kim. Lieutenant Commander Morgan Hayes stood at the back of the room, her arms crossed over her plate carrier. At 5'9", she was lean, built like a coiled spring, with eyes the color of chipped flint that missed absolutely nothing. Pinned to her uniform was the special warfare insignia, the SEAL Trident. She hadn't been handed it. She had bled for it in the freezing surf of Coronado, surviving the exact same meat grinder as the men standing around her. Yet in rooms like this, the Trident sometimes felt like a target rather than a shield. The high-value target is Nathaniel Reed, an American engineer working for a civilian infrastructure NGO. Captain Gregory Mitchell said, dragging a laser pointer across the satellite map. He was snatched 3 days ago. Intel suggests the Splinter Cell is holding him in the basement of this main administration building. We have a 48-hour window before they move him across the border, and if that happens, he's a ghost. Standing next to the map table was Wyatt Mercer. Mercer was a mountain of a man, a former ranger who had transitioned into the lucrative shadowy world of private military contracting. He now led the extraction team for Obsidian Solutions, a PMC hired by Reed's wealthy family when the government's wheels turned too slowly. Mercer was undeniably lethal, but he was also a relic, a product of the old guard who believed the battlefield belonged exclusively to thick-necked men with jawlines carved from granite. "My team breaches here," Mercer grunted, tapping a heavy calloused finger on the southern gate. "We hit the compound, flash the interior grab Reed, and exfil via the dry riverbed to the east. Quick and dirty. But we're completely exposed crossing this courtyard. I need absolute perfection from Overwatch." "You'll have it," Captain Mitchell said. "Lieutenant Commander Hayes will be running primary Overwatch from the communications tower, 400 yards north of the compound. She'll have eyes on your entire movement." Mercer stopped. He turned his head slowly, his eyes dragging over Hayes from her combat boots to the messy blonde bun secured beneath her tactical helmet. A slow, contemptuous smirk spread across his bearded face. "You're putting a woman on the glass?" Mercer asked, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that silenced the room. "I'm putting a Tier 1 sniper on the glass." "Mercer!" Mitchell corrected, his tone hardening. Mercer scoffed, crossing his massive arms. "With all due respect, Captain, this isn't a PR stunt, and it isn't a training exercise. When my boys are crossing that courtyard, we're going to be fish in a barrel. If someone steps out of a doorway with an RPG, I need the person on that scope to pull the trigger without a second of hesitation. Sniping requires ice in the veins. It's dirty, it's visceral, and it's a man's work. I need a real man for this. Someone who won't freeze when the pink mist starts flying." The TOC went dead quiet. The analysts stared at their screens, pretending not to hear. Morgan didn't flinch. She didn't yell and she didn't puff out her chest. She simply uncrossed her arms and took 2 steps forward, closing the distance between herself and the massive contractor. "My grouping at 1,200 yards in a crosswind is 3 inches. Mercer." Morgan said, her voice eerily calm, smooth as glass. I don't freeze. I don't hesitate. And I don't miss. When you're down there running for your life, you won't care about my gender. You'll only care about my ballistics. So I suggest you worry about your own heartbeat and let me manage mine. Mercer stared down at her, a muscle twitching in his jaw. He let out a harsh, patronizing laugh. Right. Sure thing, sweetheart. Just make sure the safety is off when you're looking through the glass. He turned back to the table, dismissing her entirely. Morgan's spotter, a quiet, lanky operator named Liam O'Connor, stepped up beside her. Don't let the knuckle-dragger get in your head, boss, Liam muttered under his breath. He's not in my head, Liam, Morgan replied, her eyes locked on the thermal map. But he's walking into a choke point. Look at the layout. If I were setting a trap, that courtyard is exactly where I'd want him. You think intel is wrong? I think we need to pack extra magazines, Morgan said softly. The desert night was a suffocating blanket of heat and silence. A pair of heavily modified MH-60 Black Hawks ran dark skimming just 50 feet above the undulating sand dunes to avoid radar detection. The smell of aviation fuel and copper hung heavy in the cabin. Morgan sat near the open door, the wind whipping violently around her. Resting between her knees was her primary weapon, a Barrett MRAD, chambered in .338 Lapua Magnum. It was a beautiful, terrifying piece of machinery, custom-tuned to her exact specifications. 2 minutes, the crew chief shouted over the roar of the rotors, holding up 2 fingers. The insertion was flawless. Morgan and Liam fast-roped onto a rocky outcropping a mile from the refinery, humping their gear through the dark until they reached the rusted skeletal remains of a communications tower. It offered a commanding view of the entire compound, exactly 450 yards from the administration building. Morgan set up her hide with practiced efficiency. She went prone, adjusting her bipod on a flattened piece of corrugated steel, draping a piece of sniper netting over her head and shoulders to break up her silhouette. She settled her cheek against the stock, exhaling slowly as she peered through the night force optic. The world snapped into sharp, green-tinted focus. Wind is 3 miles per hour coming from the east, Liam whispered, his eye pressed against his spotting scope. Humidity is low, barometric pressure dropping. Dial in a quarter. MOA right. Dialed. Morgan confirmed, her finger resting just outside the trigger guard. I have eyes on the courtyard. I see Mercer's team stacked at the southern wall. Down in the dirt, Wyatt Mercer and his 6-man element looked like heavily armed ghosts in the night vision feed. They moved with undeniable tactical proficiency, cutting through the perimeter fence and sliding into the shadows of the rusted oil drums. Overwatch, this is Anvil 1. Mercer's voice crackled over the comms in Morgan's earpiece. Even through the radio, his arrogance was palpable. We are pushing to the main structure. Keep your eyes open, sweetheart. Morgan ignored the jab. Anvil 1 Overwatch. I track you. Scans are clear. No movement on the rooftops. Mercer's team moved into the open courtyard. They were completely exposed for a span of 30 yards. They moved fast, weapons up, clearing their sectors. They reached the heavy metal doors of the administration building. Mercer placed a breach charge. 3, 2, 1. A muffled thump echoed across the desert as the charge blew the door inward. Mercer's team flooded inside. For 60 seconds there was nothing but the tense silence of the desert. Morgan tracked her reticle across the windows, looking for any sign of a struggle. Then the comms erupted. Compromised! Compromised! Mercer bellowed over the radio, the sound of heavy, sustained gunfire drowning out his words. Target is not here. I repeat, Reed is not. Suddenly the entire refinery lit up. Massive halogen floodlights, previously hidden beneath camouflage netting, slammed on, bathing the courtyard in blinding white light. "It's a trap," Liam hissed. "Morgan, look. Second floor north building." Morgan shifted her rifle. 3 men were kicking out a window. One of them was dragging a heavy tripod-mounted weapon into place. A DSHK 12.7mm heavy machine gun. "Anvil 1, fall back. You have heavy armor setting up on the north elevation." Morgan barked into the radio. But it was too late. Mercer's team came pouring out of the administration building, attempting to retreat across the illuminated courtyard. The moment they hit the open ground, all hell broke loose. The DSHK opened fire. The deafening, rhythmic thud, thud, thud of the weapon tore through the night. Cinder blocks exploded. Dust and shrapnel filled the air. "Man down! Man down!" a contractor screamed. Morgan watched through the glass. One of Mercer's men took a round to the chest plate, the kinetic force throwing him violently onto his back. Mercer grabbed him by the drag handle, hauling him behind the pathetic cover of a decaying concrete planter. Then Mercer fell. Through the magnified optic, Morgan saw the exact moment the 7.62 round tore through Mercer's right thigh. His leg buckled instantly, spraying a mist of crimson against the pale concrete. He collapsed hard, dropping his rifle, screaming in agony. They were pinned. 6 men trapped in an illuminated kill zone, outgunned and completely outmaneuvered. Overwatch. Mercer's voice was completely stripped of its earlier arrogance. It was now laced with raw, unadulterated panic. "We are pinned, taking heavy fire. We need immediate suppression." Morgan's heart rate dropped. The chaos of the battlefield faded away. There was no noise. There was only the math, the wind, and the reticle. "Send it," Liam whispered. Morgan exhaled, pausing at the absolute bottom of her breath, and squeezed the trigger. The MRAD roared a blast of fire erupting from the muzzle. The massive point, .338 caliber slug, covered the 450 yards in a fraction of a second. Inside the north building, the DSHK gunner's head violently snapped back as the round struck him squarely in the bridge of the nose. He crumpled backward, pulling the heavy machine gun down with him. The deafening thud, thud, thud ceased instantly. Morgan aggressively racked the bolt back, ejecting the smoking brass casing and chambering another round without pulling her eye from the scope. "Target down." "Shifting left," Morgan said clinically. 2 tangos moving onto the catwalk directly above Mercer, Liam called out. "One has an RPG." Morgan swung the barrel. She found the man with the rocket launcher, hoisting the tube onto his shoulder, aiming straight down at the concrete planter where Mercer was bleeding out. 50 yards closer, wind constant. She fired. The round took the insurgent in the throat. He collapsed over the railing, dropping the RPG, which clattered harmlessly to the ground below. "Tango down," Morgan stated. She racked the bolt again. Smooth, mechanical, relentless. Down in the courtyard, Mercer was desperately wrapping a tourniquet high on his shattered thigh, his hands slick with his own blood. He looked up toward the communications tower in the distance. He couldn't see her in the dark, but he could hear the distinct, booming crack of her rifle rolling across the desert. Every time that gun fired, an enemy aiming at him dropped dead. "Movement ground floor 3, rushing the courtyard from the east," Liam shouted. "I see them." Morgan's hands flew over the rifle, adjusting her parallax, tracking the leading runner. He was moving fast, zigzagging. She led him by 3 feet, predicting his path, and fired. The round caught him in the center mass, spinning him violently to the ground. The 2 men behind him scrambled for cover, but Morgan had already racked the bolt. She put a bullet through the thin metal door one of them was hiding behind, killing him instantly. For the next 5 minutes, Morgan Hayes became an angel of death. She fired 14 rounds. She confirmed 14 kills. She systematically dismantled the ambush, prioritizing targets that posed the most immediate threat to the wounded contractor, bleeding into the dirt. When the last insurgent fell back into the shadows, realizing that stepping into the courtyard meant instant death, an eerie silence returned to the compound. Anvil 1 Overwatch. Morgan's calm, steady voice crackled in Mercer's ear. The courtyard is clear. You have a 60-second window to extract your wounded before they regroup. Move now. Mercer lay in the dirt, gasping for air, staring at the distant tower. The woman he had insulted, the woman he had claimed, didn't have the stomach for real war, had just single-handedly kept his entire team alive with a display of marksmanship he had never witnessed in all his years of combat. Copy. Overwatch. Mercer coughed, his voice trembling as his men pulled him to his feet. We're moving. The extraction was a chaotic, blood-soaked scramble. Mercer's surviving operators hauled his massive frame across the remaining stretch of the illuminated courtyard, their boots slipping on the blood-slicked concrete. Above them, the night sky remained a canopy of absolute darkness, broken only by the sporadic, terrifying muzzle flashes from the communications tower 400 yards away. Every time Morgan pulled the trigger, the heavy, 338 Lapua Magnum sent a shock wave across the desert basin, followed instantly by the violent collapse of another hostile fighter. She was a metronome of death, keeping a perfect deadly rhythm that bought Mercer's men the precious seconds they needed to reach the perimeter fence. Jackson, the team's lead medic, practically threw Mercer through the breach in the chain-link fence. The contractor landed hard in the dirt, groaning as the impact jostled his shattered thigh. The tourniquet was holding, but the blood loss was already severe. Mercer's face was the color of ash beneath his thick beard. Move, move, move! Jackson screamed, grabbing Mercer's drag handle again. Down into the wadi. We need to break line of sight before they bring up heavy ordnance. They tumbled down the steep embankment into the dry riverbed. The wadi offered defilade, shielding them from the compound's direct fire, but it also cut them off from Morgan's overwatch. They were now blind, navigating a twisting canyon of jagged rock and loose sand. Up in the communications tower, Morgan watched the thermals as Mercer's team vanished into the ditch. The moment they dropped out of sight, the tactical situation shifted drastically. They are in the wadi, Liam announced, his eye still glued to the spotting scope. I have lost visual on Anvil 1. Scans are showing multiple heat signatures converging on the courtyard. They are regrouping. They aren't just regrouping, Morgan said, her voice dropping an octave as she caught a flicker of movement on the far side of the administration building. They are setting up a mortar tube. They know we are in this tower, and they know we are the only thing keeping that PMC team alive. A hollow thump echoed from the compound. It was a distinct sound entirely different from small arms fire. Incoming! Liam shouted. Morgan didn't hesitate. Displace, now! She collapsed the bipod of her Barrett MRAD, slinging the heavy rifle over her shoulder in one fluid motion. They scrambled toward the rusted ladder, just as the first 60mm mortar shell shrieked through the air. It impacted 50 yards short of the tower, sending a geyser of sand and shrapnel into the night sky. The shockwave rattled the skeletal steel structure, showering Morgan and Liam in a cascade of rust and debris. They descended the ladder with reckless speed, their gloves tearing against the jagged metal rings. A second mortar shell impacted much closer, deafening them with a thunderous detonation that shook the ground beneath their boots. We are cut off from the primary extraction point, Liam grunted, hitting the desert floor and bringing his suppressed MK-18 carbine to bear. The mortar team is walking their fire right onto our position. We need to move east into the dunes. No, Morgan replied, her eyes scanning the darkness through her dual-tube night vision goggles. If we move east, we leave Mercer's team completely unprotected in that riverbed. The hostiles will send a flanking element down the wadi to finish them off. We are moving south. We are going to intercept. Liam looked at her, his expression hidden behind the glowing green lenses of his NVGs. Moving south meant running directly toward the enemy stronghold, abandoning the safety of distance to engage in close-quarters combat, a nightmare scenario for a sniper team. But he knew better than to argue. When Morgan Hayes made a tactical decision, she was already 3 steps ahead of the enemy. "Copy that," Liam said. "Moving south." They sprinted through the darkness, maintaining a low profile, weaving between massive outcroppings of sandstone. The desert was alive with the sounds of chaos, shouting voices, distant gunfire, and the revving of engines. As they crested a small ridge overlooking the rear of the compound, Morgan suddenly held up a clenched fist. Liam dropped to a knee, instantly his weapon raised. Below them, hidden in a deep ravine, entirely masked from aerial surveillance, was a pair of dusty armored SUVs. A group of 6 heavily armed men were frantically loading large metal crates into the back of the vehicles, and there being shoved brutally into the back seat of the lead SUV was a man with a burlap sack over his head. Morgan adjusted her optics, zooming in on the hostage. His hands were zip-tied behind his back, but she could clearly see the distinct heavy diving watch on his left wrist, the exact watch detailed in the intelligence briefing. "Liam," Morgan whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Look at the vehicles. It's Nathaniel Reed." "What?" Liam hissed in disbelief. Intel said he was in the basement. The basement was a decoy. Morgan deduced rapidly, the pieces of the puzzle snapping together in her mind. The ambush in the courtyard wasn't just a trap. It was a diversion. They wanted Mercer's team pinned down and screaming for air support while they quietly slipped the high-value target out the back door. If those SUVs reach the highway, Reed is gone forever. Morgan Mercer's team is still trapped in the wadi. Liam warned, checking his tactical tablet. "I'm intercepting radio chatter. A hostile patrol is closing in on Anvil 1's position right now. They are about to get overrun." Morgan was faced with an impossible choice: save the extraction team or secure the hostage. The mission dictated the hostage. Her conscience screamed for the men bleeding in the dirt. Her flint-colored eyes narrowed. She wasn't about to choose. She was going to do both. "We take the convoy," Morgan commanded, unholstering her suppressed Sig Sauer P226 sidearm and checking the chamber. "Then we use their vehicles to extract Mercer. We have the element of surprise. Let's introduce them to the Trident." The descent into the ravine was swift and utterly silent. Morgan and Liam moved like phantoms, their footfalls muffled by the soft desert sand. The 6 insurgents surrounding the SUVs were completely focused on loading the final crates, barking orders at one another in a panicked frenzy, oblivious to the apex predators closing in from the shadows. Morgan took the left flank. Liam took the right. At 20 yards, they established visual contact with each other, exchanging a single synchronized nod. Morgan raised her MK-18 carbine, settling the holographic sight on the chest of the driver of the lead SUV. She squeezed the trigger. The suppressed weapon let out a sharp "foot," and the driver collapsed against the steering wheel, instantly dead. Simultaneously, Liam took down the man guarding the rear vehicle. The synchronization was so perfect that the remaining 4 hostiles didn't even realize they were under attack until the bodies hit the dirt. Chaos erupted in the ravine. An insurgent raised his AK-47, blindly spraying fire toward the ridge. Morgan didn't flinch. She stepped smoothly out of the shadows, fluidly transitioning her aim. 2 rounds to the chest, 1 to the head. The man dropped like a stone. Another fighter lunged for the passenger door of the lead SUV, desperately trying to get the vehicle moving to escape with the hostage. Morgan sprinted forward, closing the distance with terrifying speed. As the man yanked the door open, Morgan slammed the barrel of her carbine into the hinge, trapping his arm. Before he could scream, she drew her combat knife with her left hand and drove it upward into his subclavian artery. He slumped against the armored glass. The final 2 hostiles panicked, abandoning the vehicles and fleeing into the darkness of the ravine. Liam dropped one with a precision shot to the spine. The other vanished into the desert night. Within 15 seconds, the ambush was over. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the idling engine of the lead SUV. Morgan tore open the rear door. Nathaniel Reed was thrashing, violently terrified by the sudden gunfire. Morgan ripped the burlap sack from his head. Reed gasped for air, his eyes wide with panic. "Nathaniel Reed, I am Lieutenant Commander Hayes with the United States Navy," Morgan said, her voice projecting an absolute, unbreakable calm. "You are safe now, but I need you to stay down, keep quiet, and hold on tight. We have some friends to pick up." Reed, trembling violently, managed a frantic nod. "Liam, take the wheel," Morgan barked, tossing her sniper rifle into the back and jumping into the passenger seat. "Get us into that wadi now." Liam threw the heavy SUV into gear, the tires spinning wildly in the sand before catching traction. The armored vehicle launched forward, tearing out of the ravine and accelerating across the open desert. 2 miles away, inside the dry riverbed, Wyatt Mercer was preparing to die. His team had established a desperate circular perimeter among the boulders. They were completely out of medical supplies, and their ammunition was critically low. Jackson was frantically applying pressure to Mercer's leg, but the contractor was fading fast, his vision blurring around the edges. "They're coming!" one of the operators shouted over the radio. "I have 20+ heat signatures moving down the banks of the wadi. We are boxed in." Mercer weakly pulled his sidearm from its holster, checking the magazine. 7 rounds left. It was a pathetic defense against an advancing army. He thought about the female SEAL he had insulted hours ago in the TOC. He had demanded a real man to cover his team, entirely dismissing her capabilities, based on his own antiquated ego. And yet she had been the only reason they had made it out of that courtyard, alive. Now the Overwatch was silent, and the darkness was closing in. "Hold the line, boys," Mercer choked out his voice, a ragged whisper. "Make them pay for every inch." The first wave of insurgents crested the lip of the wadi, their silhouettes stark against the starlit sky. They raised their weapons, preparing to rain fire down into the ditch. Suddenly, the roar of a massive V8 engine shattered the night. The insurgents turned blinded as high-beam headlights suddenly illuminated the rim of the wadi. Liam drove the armored SUV completely off the embankment, launching the heavy vehicle through the air. It crashed down into the riverbed with a tremendous metal-crunching impact, landing directly between Mercer's pinned team and the advancing hostiles. Before the vehicle had even completely settled, the passenger door flew open. Morgan Hayes stepped out, planting her boots firmly in the sand. She didn't have her sniper rifle. She had her MK-18 and an absolute terrifying command of the battlefield. Morgan opened fire. She moved with ruthless mechanical precision, engaging the hostiles on the ridge. She wasn't just suppressing them, she was eliminating them. Every pull of the trigger found its mark. She exhausted her primary magazine, let the carbine drop on its sling, and drew her P2-26 sidearm in a fraction of a second, seamlessly continuing the assault. The insurgents, caught completely off guard by the sudden overwhelming violence of action, broke formation and scattered, retreating back into the dunes. The wadi fell silent, save for the hiss of the SUV's radiator. Morgan holstered her weapon and turned. She walked over to where Mercer lay, bleeding in the dirt. She knelt beside him, her flint-colored eyes locking onto his pale, shocked face. "You called for immediate suppression. Anvil won." Morgan said, her voice devoid of any arrogance or spite. It was simply a statement of fact. "You have it." Mercer stared at her. He looked at the smoking weapons, the shattered SUV, and then at Nathaniel Reed, who was peering nervously out of the armored window. This woman hadn't just provided overwatch. She had abandoned her hide, hunted down the enemy, secured the hostage, and orchestrated a motorized cavalry charge into a ditch to save his life. "Extraction birds are 3 minutes out," Morgan announced, tapping her earpiece. "Jackson, prep him for a hoist." 2 heavily armed MH-60 Black Hawks crested the horizon, their rotors beating the desert air into a furious sandstorm. The rescue was chaotic, loud, and entirely successful. They loaded Reed, then hoisted Mercer's battered team into the safety of the cabin. 4 hours later, the glaring fluorescent lights of the surgical tent at FOB Cerberus washed over the room. The chaos of the mission had finally subsided into the sterile hum of medical equipment. Morgan stood near the entrance, a cup of terrible lukewarm coffee in her hand. Her uniform was caked in dried mud, sweat, and gunpowder. Captain Mitchell had already debriefed her, commending the flawless execution of both the overwatch and the hostage recovery. A medic wheeled a gurney past her, preparing to transfer Wyatt Mercer to a transport plane bound for Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany. Mercer's leg was heavily bandaged, immobilized in a traction splint. He looked exhausted, defeated, and significantly older than he had that morning. As the gurney passed, Morgan Mercer reached out a thick, trembling hand and grabbed the edge of her plate carrier. The medic stopped. Mercer looked up at Morgan. The arrogance was completely gone, replaced by a profound, humbling realization. He had survived because he had been entirely wrong. "Commander Hayes," Mercer rasped, his voice raw. Morgan looked down at him, her expression neutral. "Contractor." Mercer swallowed hard, his eyes shimmering with unshed emotion. "When I was in that courtyard, when I took that round, I thought I was dead. I thought my entire team was dead." He paused, his grip tightening slightly on her vest. "I demanded a real man for the job. I was a fool. You are the most lethal, composed, and terrifying operator I have ever seen in a combat zone. You saved my life. You saved all of us." Morgan looked at him for a long moment. She didn't smile, and she didn't gloat. She simply nodded, acknowledging the profound weight of his words. "The battlefield doesn't care about your ego, Mercer," Morgan said softly, her voice steady. "It only cares about who is willing to do the work. Have a safe flight." She gently removed his hand from her vest and stepped back into the shadows of the tent, her coffee in hand, ready for the next mission. Thank you for tuning in to this incredible story of bravery, precision, and survival on the modern battlefield. If Morgan's unparalleled skills and Mercer's dramatic rescue kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button and share this video with your friends. Do not forget to subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss out on our thrilling real-life combat stories. Drop a comment below about your favorite moment. Stay tactical, everyone.